Imagine this. You're standing before a mirror in a dimly lit room. Your reflection stares back, familiar yet somehow foreign. As you gaze deeper, something shifts. A flicker of someone else appears in your eyes. A stranger? A shadow? Someone you've never consciously met, but who has been with you all along. In that unsettling moment, you realize you are not fully known to yourself. What if the person you believe yourself to be, your thoughts, desires, fears, and dreams, represents merely the tip of a vast psychic iceberg? What if beneath your waking consciousness lies an ocean of forgotten memories, repressed impulses, and ancient symbols that silently steer the ship of your existence? The contradiction that haunts us is this: we believe ourselves to be rational captains of our own souls, yet we remain largely blind to the true forces that drive our most significant choices. We fall inexplicably in love with people who mirror our unhealed wounds. We sabotage our success just as we approach our greatest achievements. We dream in languages we don't speak and fear creatures we've never encountered. Consider the last time you felt an overwhelming emotion surge through you without warning: rage, desire, or dread that seemed disproportionate to the situation. Where did that tsunami of feeling originate? Or recall that dream where you were simultaneously yourself and someone else entirely. Who was that other being wearing your face? Jung called this vast unexplored territory. The unconscious, not merely a repository for repressed thoughts as Freud suggested, but a living, breathing ecosystem of autonomous psychic energies. A realm where time runs differently, where symbols speak louder than words, and where the boundaries between your individual existence and the collective experience of humanity dissolve. The map he charted of this inner wilderness offers not just a theory, but a profound challenge. What happens when you discover that the most significant parts of your psyche operate beyond your conscious control? What becomes of your notion of self when you realize that you are merely the visible surface of something far more ancient and vast? As we venture deeper into Jung's cartography of the unconscious, prepare to confront the most disturbing question of all. If you are not who you think you are, then who or what are you? The reason we remain strangers to ourselves lies in a fundamental misunderstanding of consciousness that has plagued Western thought for centuries. We have inherited the Cartesian illusion that the thinking mind, the rational ego, represents the totality of our being. I think, therefore I am, declared Descartes, elevating conscious thought to the defining feature of existence while banishing everything else to the shadows. Jung understood what Nietzsche had already suspected. The ego is not master in its own house. The conscious mind, that fragile lantern we carry through life, illuminates only a small fraction of our psychological terrain. The rest, the vast unconscious, remains shrouded in darkness, not because it is unimportant, but because its immensity would overwhelm us if perceived all at once. This unconscious realm, according to Jung, consists of two distinct yet interconnected layers. The personal unconscious contains everything we have forgotten, repressed, or never fully integrated into consciousness: childhood traumas, unacknowledged desires, rejected aspects of our personality. But beneath this individual layer lies something far more profound: the collective unconscious, a psychic inheritance as old as humanity itself. Unlike Freud, who saw the unconscious primarily as a warehouse for repressed sexual and aggressive impulses, Jung recognized it as the living foundation of all psychic life, a creative wellspring of symbols, patterns, and potentials that has guided human experience across millennia. This collective layer houses what Jung called archetypes, universal templates of human experience that appear in dreams, myths, religions, and art across all cultures. Consider how Arthur Schopenhauer described the world as will and representation, suggesting that beneath the surface of perceived reality lies an irrational, driving force, a concept that deeply influenced both Nietzsche and Jung. Or how Aldous Huxley spoke of the doors of perception that, when cleansed, reveal the infinite that lies behind ordinary consciousness. The problem is not merely academic. When we deny the existence and power of the unconscious, we sever ourselves from the very roots of our being. We become like trees that refuse to acknowledge their connection to the soil, wondering why we feel unstable, malnourished, and increasingly brittle. This denial manifests as psychological symptoms that plague modern life: anxiety that has no apparent cause, depression that medication alone cannot cure, addictive behaviors that resist rational intervention, relationships that inexplicably repeat the same painful patterns. As Jean-Paul Sartre might observe, we are condemned to freedom yet unconsciously chain ourselves to invisible prisons. The ego's insistence on autonomy, what Jung called inflation, creates the very suffering it seeks to avoid. When we identify exclusively with consciousness, we project the disowned parts of ourselves onto others, seeing in them the shadow qualities we refuse to recognize as our own. We wage inner wars that manifest as outer conflicts. We seek external solutions to internal disharmony. The unconscious does not disappear when ignored. Like water pressing against a dam, it builds pressure until it forces acknowledgement through dreams, slips of the tongue, neurotic symptoms, or what Viktor Frankl would call the existential vacuum, that sense of meaninglessness that emerges when we lose connection to deeper purpose. What makes this problem particularly insidious is how invisibly it operates. The ego, threatened by what it cannot control, constructs elaborate defenses to maintain the illusion of sovereignty. We rationalize irrational behaviors. We explain away meaningful coincidences as mere chance. We medicalize spiritual crises and intellectualize emotional wounds. And yet, the unconscious continues its silent work beneath the surface, shaping our perceptions, influencing our choices, and occasionally erupting into consciousness in ways we cannot ignore, revealing that the map we have been using to navigate our lives is woefully incomplete. The price of ignoring Jung's map of the unconscious isn't merely theoretical, it manifests in concrete ways that silently shape both individual lives and collective society. What remains unseen doesn't remain unfelt. When the shadow your disowned qualities, repressed impulses, and denied potentials operates outside awareness, it doesn't disappear. Instead, it gains autonomy. Those parts of yourself that you refuse to acknowledge become the very forces that seem to sabotage you from within. The promotion you inexplicably self-sabotage. The relationship pattern you keep repeating despite your best intentions. The irrational fears that seem to have no source. Neurologically, this manifests through what modern science calls implicit memory and unconscious processing. Your brain makes decisions seconds before your conscious mind becomes aware of them. Your nervous system carries the imprint of experiences you can no longer recall. Your body remembers what your mind has forgotten. Consider the confirmation bias that shapes your perception without your awareness. You don't see reality as it is, you see what your unconscious has primed you to notice. The selective attention that filters your experience isn't neutral, it's shaped by unconscious complexes, those emotionally charged clusters of associations that Jung identified as the building blocks of the personal unconscious. These complexes function like invisible magnetic fields, pulling certain experiences toward you while pushing others away. The father complex that makes you overreact to authority figures. The mother complex that influences your intimate relationships. The inferiority complex that makes you defensive in situations where others seem casual. But the consequences extend far beyond individual psychology. Jung understood that the collective unconscious, that shared psychic inheritance of humanity, shapes societies as powerfully as it shapes individuals. When cultures repress certain archetypes, these forces don't disappear, but return in distorted, often destructive forms. The shadow of technological progress manifests as environmental destruction. The denied feminine principle in patriarchal societies erupts as crisis in relationship and connection. The repressed primitive instincts in civilized cultures emerge as violence, addiction, and self-destructive behavior. Consider how modern society's exclusive focus on the rational, the measurable, and the material has led to what Jung called psychic epidemic, a collective one-sidedness that generates its own pathologies. The spiritual hunger that drives people to extremes of consumption or ideology. The soul starvation that no amount of entertainment or distraction can satisfy. This is the ultimate consequence of navigating life with an incomplete map. We become strangers not only to ourselves but to each other. We project our disowned qualities onto other people, groups, and nations, seeing in them the very traits we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. We externalize internal conflicts, transforming psychological shadow into social scapegoating. The irony is that the very act of denying these unconscious forces grants them more power. As Jung observed, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. What seems like external circumstance often reflects internal condition, a principle that modern cognitive psychology confirms through concepts like self-fulfilling prophecy and learned helplessness. This creates a double bind. The ego cannot solve problems created by the ego's own limited perspective. The same consciousness that created the split cannot heal it. The rational mind that insists on control creates the very conditions of its own frustration. And yet, the unconscious not only creates problems, but also contains their solutions. Dreams don't merely reflect our conflicts, they offer symbolic paths toward resolution. Synchronicities, those meaningful coincidences that seem to defy probability, suggest connections between psyche and matter that transcend conventional understanding. The very archetypes that can possess us when unconscious can guide us when consciously engaged. The consequences of ignoring the unconscious are ultimately measured not in abstract concepts, but in unlived life, the paths not taken, the potential unfulfilled, the wholeness never achieved. But hidden within this loss lies a profound opportunity, the possibility of a fundamentally different relationship with yourself and the world. The radical shift in perspective that Jung offers is not merely intellectual, it's revolutionary. It begins with a counterintuitive realization. The path to freedom lies not in further separation from the unconscious, but in deliberate engagement with it. The ego must surrender its illusion of absolute control to gain true autonomy. This is not surrender in the sense of defeat, but rather what Jung called active imagination, the conscious decision to meet the unconscious as a partner rather than an adversary. Unlike the passive victim of unconscious forces or the rigid ego that denies them, you can become an active participant in your own psychological reality. The first act of rebellion is simple yet profound acknowledge that you are more than your conscious identity. Your dreams are not random neural firings, but meaningful communications from parts of yourself that speak in symbols rather than words. Your inexplicable attractions and aversions carry information about your inner landscape. Your slips of the tongue and spontaneous fantasies offer glimpses into the unconscious narrative that runs beneath your official story. Consider the historical figures who embodied this rebellion. Jung himself, who dared to document his own confrontation with the unconscious in the Red Book, deliberately inducing visions and recording dialogues with figures from his psyche. Or Hermann Hesse, whose novel Demian charts the journey of a young man breaking free from conventional consciousness to discover his authentic self. Or mythological figures like Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods to empower humanity. The tools for this rebellion are ancient yet ever new dream work that treats each dream as a personal myth, active imagination that dialogues with unconscious contents, creative expression that gives form to internal images, attention to synchronicities that reveal connections between inner and outer worlds. Unlike the ego's strategy of suppression, this approach requires radical acceptance. The shadow must be acknowledged not to indulge it, but to integrate its energy. The inner masculine and feminine principles, what Jung called animus and anima, must be recognized, not as threats to identity, but as complementary aspects of wholeness. This is not comfortable work. When you first turn toward the unconscious, you may encounter guilt, shame, fear, or anger, the guardians of the threshold that protect the ego from overwhelming transformation. You may discover parts of yourself that contradict your conscious values. You may need to grieve the loss of who you thought you were before you can become who you might be. But within this discomfort lies unprecedented freedom. When you stop projecting your shadow onto others, you regain the energy spent maintaining those projections. When you recognize that the archetypes speaking through your life are universal human patterns, you free yourself from the tyranny of uniqueness, the belief that your struggles are yours alone. The paradox is that by acknowledging the forces that shape you from below, you gain the ability to consciously participate in your own evolution. What Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you are meant to be, is not about achieving perfection, but about embracing the tension of opposites within yourself. This rebellion transforms not just your relationship with yourself, but with the world. When you recognize the archetypes at work in collective events, you can respond from awareness rather than unconscious reactivity. When you understand that others' behavior toward you often reflects their own projections, you can disentangle yourself from toxic dynamics. The true rebellion is not against society, authority, or even the limitations of physical reality. It is against the ego's insistence on security, certainty, and control, the very qualities that keep you imprisoned in a fraction of your potential. By willingly entering the forest of symbols, archetypes, and paradoxes that Jung mapped, you discovered that the unconscious is not an enemy to be conquered, but a wilderness to be explored. And in that exploration, you uncover something revolutionary: the capacity for psychological sovereignty that comes not from denying darkness, but from carrying light into it. The deepest revelation in Jung's cartography of the unconscious, the insight that transforms everything, is this: what you perceive as your individual self is simultaneously utterly unique and fundamentally universal. You are both singular and collective, personal and transpersonal, temporal and eternal. This paradox shatters the conventional boundaries of identity. The archetypes that move through your psyche are not merely psychological constructs, but living connections to the accumulated human experience across time and culture. The symbols that appear in your dreams are personal expressions of universal patterns. Your innermost secrets are variations on ancient themes. Jung called this interconnected psychic foundation the collective unconscious, but its implications reach far beyond academic psychology. What you experience as the core of your being, your most authentic self, emerges from the same source that has given rise to every human consciousness throughout history. You are not merely connected to humanity. In the depths of your psyche, you are humanity. This realization dissolves the artificial boundary between inner and outer reality. The Hermetic axiom, as above, so below. As within, so without, captures what Jung discovered through years of clinical work and self-exploration. The psyche and the world are not two separate systems, but two aspects of a single reality. What modern physicists call non-locality in quantum systems, Jung recognized as synchronicity in human experience, meaningful coincidences that suggest a unity beneath apparent separation. Consider the implications of this truth for your existence. What you call your life is not merely a biological process occurring in isolation, but a focal point of consciousness within an immense psychic ecosystem. Your dreams, intuitions, and creative inspirations are not just personal productions, but may represent what Jung called a living connection with the extraconscious. Through the collective unconscious, you participate in something that transcends your individual limitations. This is not mysticism, but empirical observation. Jung spent decades documenting the appearance of identical symbols and themes in the dreams and visions of people who had no cultural exposure to those motifs. He witnessed how the individuation process, the journey towards psychological wholeness, followed patterns consistent across cultures and historical periods. He recorded how archetypes emerged in predictable sequences during psychological development, regardless of conscious belief or expectation. The ultimate power of this realization lies in its transformative effect on suffering. When you recognize that your personal struggles are variations on universal human themes, they lose their isolating quality. The shadow aspects you've been running from are not monstrous aberrations, but common human experiences awaiting integration. Even your deepest wounds connect you to the collective human journey. This doesn't diminish your uniqueness, but contextualizes it. You are not required to escape your individuality to access the collective dimension, nor must you sacrifice your connection to the collective to be authentically yourself. True individuation, becoming who you are meant to be, involves holding the tension between these seeming opposites. The self, Jung's term for the archetype of wholeness and the regulating center of the psyche, is not the ego but the totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious. It emerges as the true center of personality when you stop identifying exclusively with conscious awareness. This is not self-improvement, but self-realization, the discovery of what has always been present beneath the constructions of identity. Imagine standing at the shore of a vast ocean. The waves that break at your feet are distinctly themselves unique in their exact form and movement, yet they are also inseparable from the ocean from which they arise and to which they return. This is your consciousness in relation to the collective unconscious, both distinct and unified, both temporal and participating in something beyond time. This realization doesn't end the journey but transforms it. The map of the unconscious is not a destination, but an invitation to continuous exploration. The symbols, dreams, and synchronicities that appear in your life are not puzzles to be solved once and for all, but living communications in an ongoing dialogue between different levels of your being. In this ongoing conversation between conscious and unconscious, personal and collective, human and divine, you discover not just who you are, but who you are becoming. And in that discovery lies the most profound freedom of all, not freedom from the unconscious, but freedom through relationship with it.